This morning, I'd like to introduce Weijia Wang. Weijia co-founded M-Tone Wireless in 1994 in Silicon Valley and is currently chairman of the company. M-Tone Wireless developed the world's first mobile stock trading infrastructure and pioneered the mobile internet industry in China by providing the first mobile phone information and content services nationwide since 1999. Although Victor is a storied capitalist and technologist, over the last few years, he's been focusing his efforts on social impact. He founded the Society of Entrepreneurs and Ecology in China and is currently serving as the vice chairman. He's excited to speak to us today about these efforts and how we can take ideas and bring them to the world. Please join me in welcoming Weijia Wang.
Good morning. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Last night, I asked Andrew, I said, you look several generations removed from Chinese. Why are you involved in the chief? Andrew's answer was great. He said, China is not all about China. So here, let me see, it works. Okay. Over the last 10 years, I was incidentally involved in 4 organizations or NGOs that are somewhat influential in China. I'll go through one by one in my presentation. Okay. Before I go through the entrepreneurs, NGOs, let me lay out the big backdrop over the last 30 years. In my personal opinion, the number one, the most important one, would be the private enterprise and the private entrepreneurs. They basically, from 35 years ago, from being suppressed to today as being encouraged. For many of you, even before you were born, you know there's an entrepreneur, his name is Nian Guangjiu. He was selling fried watermelon seeds in Anhui. And as soon as he hired more than 8 employees, he violated law. And the government would put him in jail. And this was reported to Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping said, let's wait, give him a chance. That was the start point of China's private enterprise. Before then, there weren't any single private enterprise in China. There weren't any single private entrepreneurs. So over the last 30 years, private enterprises contribute to 2/3 of GDP, 60% of investment, and 85% of employment. So today, private enterprise is more than half of the sky. Besides private enterprise, there are other major changes. One, of course, is China joined the WTO and urbanization with 300 million migration worker working in the city. And the last but not least, the internet, as you all know very well. Okay. Huntington made this study, shows that when GDP per capita over $6,000 US, 90% of such country become democratic country. However, there's still 10%. So China may argue that we are that 10% because China, everything is so special. The fundamental, however, whether China will become a democracy country, the fundamental driving force will not be changed. That is, people will require more equitable wealth distribution. That means equitable power distribution. That means people need their non-alienated basic rights. What's the current condition of entrepreneurs in China? Over last 3 weeks that I spent in China, I joined many, many gatherings among entrepreneurs. I think the topic is invariably just one. Where is Wang Gongquan? And how is Wang Gongquan? Nobody knows. So basically, safety concern is #1 concern in China. So through the half dozen gatherings I attended, that's the single concern. People, since the Chongqing incident, people feel insecure in their life and property. So many plan to immigrate. And one study shows that 76% people already have a foreign passport, and 24% is planning to apply one. So basically, what's the fundamental interest of private entrepreneurs? It's their basic human rights that probably was taken as granted in 18th centuries in the Western country. Basically, the safety and the property rights. And however, among entrepreneurs, their consensus is reform, not revolution. Nobody wants the country get into a chaotic situation. There's two schools of entrepreneurs, and one school probably represented by Mr. Liu Chuanzhi, not to talk about politics. The other school probably more represented by Wang, that we should speak out our mind. So what's the next 30 years? I think everybody knows one is economic transition. I wouldn't spend more time on that. The social transition, probably from strong centralized control to more autonomous governance, and political transition from authoritarian to democracy. And the cultural transition is one of the most interesting one that people say in China, what is our value system? Today, people are looking and seeking for those. And nobody knows what will be. And that's the sort of a task for next 30 years. Given those big backdrop, and over last 10 years, there are many social organizations has been formed, one especially by entrepreneurs. There are a lot of organizations by location, such as Chamber of Commerce, and by industry, by background. For example, the Committee 2005 consists of all the returnees from Western countries. By social issues, which this one I will give more time, the Society of Entrepreneurs and the Ecology, C. And by social class, for example, the Chinese Entrepreneurs Forum. This is the very first meeting of C in 2004. In 2004, Mr. Liu Xiaoguang called up a dozen of his friends, said, we got to do something to cure the sandstorm in Beijing. And Beijing in 200 years will become part of a desert. And we say, okay, so this dozen friends of him called another dozen friends of them. So about 6 dozen friends gathered in the center of the desert. Basically, we say we got to do something. And I myself, I don't know Liu Xiaoguang, I just flew to there. I felt the urge to do something. Today we have 270 members, and each member has to commit, donate 1 million RMB over a span of 10 years. And in the very first night, Mr. Liu Xiaoguang pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and said, after some consultation with some people, we decided the following people would become our board members. As soon as he said this, there's immediately a burst of a protest, including myself. Basically, we challenged, why? Why them? Why not us? Because we made the same commitment, flew all the way from Beijing to here, and how come you can decide who's the board member? Then the next 2 hours become totally chaotic situation, because every one of those entrepreneurs was a little dictator in their own company. And they don't listen to other people because that's their habit. And after 2 hours, they realize this won't work because nobody listened to me. Whether you're Wang Shi or Ren Zhiqiang, whoever, nobody cared, nobody gave a damn to you. And finally, they realize, okay, let's vote anonymously. And they found the only solution is to vote anonymously. That's the only solution accepted by everybody. So later on, a lot of media said, oh, those bunch of entrepreneurs go to there trying to practice democracy. That's really a misunderstanding. We really didn't go there to practice democracy. That's sort of a solution was forced and emerged by itself. And so from day one, we have a DNA. As of today, SEE was the most rigorous governed social enterprise. When we have a conference, we have to strictly follow Robert's rule. Mr. Roberts is, I believe, born and raised in United States in 19th or 18th century. He wrote a small book about how to have a conference. So today, we have to follow those rigorously. And if we realize that none of us, including myself, who spent over 20 years in the United States, have any experience to run a public organization because we didn't have a training. Even myself, after I graduated, I worked in Silicon Valley as an engineer, as a manager. Nobody got involved in the community governance. And we have to learn from the very beginning, from scratch. And later on, we found environmental challenge in China was really severe. And for example, I don't know today's PM 2.5 in Boston. I would visually estimate probably under 10. But in Beijing, as you know, every day is 300. Okay, in Harbin is 1,000. So in terms of air, water, and land pollution, China is probably at least 100 times more severe than here. In terms of money invested into those, aside from government investment, the grassroots donation or private donation into environmental causes is about 1.1% of what United States. Here in this country, every year there are about $10 billion was donated to the environmental groups such as Sierra Club, such as the Nature Conservancy. In China last year, probably is less than 100 million RMB. Okay, that's the situation where our environment is 100 times more polluted. The money committed to solve the problem is less than 1%. So there's a 10,000 times difference there. That's the urgency. That's why we need to put a lot of efforts, a lot of resource behind this. To put all the NGOs into perspective, I basically used these two axes. The horizontal axis is the governance structure. To the left is flexible. When I say flexible, I mean basically there's no formal bylaws or chart. And generally, those organizations were formed by one person. So in China, we call the boss, 老大, right? And everybody listened to him. Or this NGO is very small, only 3 to 5 people. You don't need formal bylaws. The rigorous one is generally have a written bylaw, or sometimes people follow, sometimes people don't follow. For those organizations have a written bylaws and strictly follow those is the most rigorous one. The vertical axis is the pursuit of the interest of the organization. And some pursue public interest, some pursue private interest. And SEE, it will be, because the issue that we're pursuing has nothing to do with our company, or even nothing to do with our industry. So that's the most public interest. In terms of governance, it's the most rigorous. CEF, China Entrepreneur Forum, this is like China's Davos. Every year, starting year 2000, we go to a small town in Dongbei called Yabuli, where there's a ski resort. So during the morning, we ski. During the afternoon and evening, we have a conference. And in Chinese name called 中国企业家亚布力论坛. And this forum is consists of most private entrepreneurs. Their pursuit is to protect property, private property, defend market economy, and build rule of law country. So that's the main theme for last 13 years. Every year we have two conferences, winter and summer. E-China is another group that I was co-founded. Today is the largest organization in the IT and the internet industry. And every spring we have a IT summit meeting in Shenzhen. So basically all the big internet companies, IT companies are our members. 205, I just mentioned that consists of all the overseas returnees. Today we have about 150 members. A lot of the people you may heard, for example, Li Kaifu, Yang Lan, Xu Xiaoping, and our members. There are many chamber of commerce. And also today, there's probably over 2,000 private foundations in China. And those foundations, their pursuit are all public interest. But they don't necessarily have a very rigorous governance structure. Through the years, SEE Foundation supported a lot of grassroots NGOs. We found those NGOs are very small, generally 3 to 5 people, and they don't need or they don't have a rigorous governance structure. Of course, there are all kinds of private circles like a wine club, golf club, all kinds of interest club. So I would put this into here. So if you use these two axes, basically you can put every single organization into perspective. So why we need those social organizations? I think if China want to be a mature rule of law country, you have to have a local sort of train the people to really practice those, to learn to be self-governed rather than governed or forced by other forces. So the road of a rule of law must be based on local level contractual mentality and practice. And as I mentioned before, in China, anybody under 70 years old have no experience on self-governance or community. We have to, everybody, including from 70 years old to 10 years old, we have to learn from scratch. That's the sort of a long process. And so basically, everybody wanted China to be peacefully and stably for long run. But the one important factor to make sure this will happen is that you have to have a lot of social organization. If the society is very divided and isolated, the society generally is very unstable. To give you an example, I think a couple of years ago when Japan has this nuclear accident, and there's some rumors that salt can prevent nuclear pollution. In all the Zhejiang and Jiangsu area, all the salt was snapped out. And the central government was very nervous because there weren't a lot of social trust in the society. So the society generally would be very vulnerable and very unstable, facing major disasters. So if a society is weaved by many organizations, so each of our organizations is like a big net, right? If you have many, many nets, the society, every single individual will be weaved into those nets. The society generally will build a lot of trust and generally much more stable in long run. And so that's for China's its own good. We need those. But who will be the leaders of those autonomous governance? I think private entrepreneurs will play a major role. People say, recently there's a book, very famous, called the French Revolution and Old Institution, written by French writer Tocqueville. When he visited the United States about 150 years ago, he wrote another most famous book called On American Democracy. His keen observation is compare US and French. A US is an entirely self-governed society, built from bottom up, little town by little town. And so people say, do we Chinese have a self-governance tradition? My argument is yes. If you look at this data, in Tang Dynasty, there are only 30,000 officials managing about 90 million people. And in Qing Dynasty, only 200,000 people, officials, managing about 400 million people. Even in Republic of China, the ratio of official people is pretty high, 1 to 1,000. In one of the provinces, I think in the 1940s, in Guizhou, in the entire county, there are only 12 officials, including the governor and a few staffs. So how can 12 people managing 200,000 peasants? Impossible, right? But that was the China's history for the last 2,000 years. The reason is China, the society structure is called sandwich structure. From emperor to officials, there are only a small number of them. Then there's a large number of farmers. In between, there are several millions of volunteers. Who are they? They're the gentries and the landlords. And those gentries and landlords basically donate money, donate their time. They solve the local education problem. They resolve the local conflict. And they basically relieve the local natural disaster. So they're, without this middle layer in the sandwich, China won't work. So there's huge amount of people are doing this on their own. So China indeed has a lot of those traditions. However, after 1949, all these local organizations or social organizations was destroyed because by China learned from Soviet Union that party has to manage every single aspect of your life. And that is the root cause of today's cost. The blue line is for the Chinese central government revenue, which increased as twice as fast as GDP, about 20% every year. The line below is the policing cost or Weijia cost. This is a study done by Tsinghua University. And if you extrapolate the trends or numbers happening last few years, you will find pretty soon the total policing cost will catch up with the total revenue of the government. That means this, this kind of a trend is totally unsustainable. So what's the difference between traditional self-governance versus modern governance? If you look at the traditional governance, every village is managed by the family, right? Or we call 宗族. So they're based on number one, acquaintance, or number two, family or location. But today, all the organizations are based on stranger. So basically, when we look at the story of the sea, right? When I go to the desert, I personally, I don't know Liu Xiaoguang himself, okay? So we have about 80 people. These 80 people don't know each other. If that night the meeting was all among acquaintances among all friends, the DNA will be totally different, because when Liu Xiaoguang pull off a piece of paper, we will all give him what? Face, right? We say, okay, boss, brother, you have your way. Because I don't know him. I don't give a damn to him. That's why I challenge him. So to managing strangers, you have to based on what? Contractual spirit, based on contract. And in the old times, the pillar falls in between. The sandwich, the middle layer in the sandwich is a landlord and gentry. Today, inevitably, this role will fall on the shoulder of entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs possesses most resources in the society. They have the most mobility, they can mobilize most resources. In old times, the reason China is ultra-stable society, because from emperor, official, to gentries, to farmers, they all believe in one value system, which is Confucianism. But today, we're in the tricky period, and one school of people argue that China cannot adopt universal value system, and we need to go back to Confucianism. The other school argue that we should completely adopt universal value system. So today, I think the thing is still evolving and in front of us. I personally do not know what's the sort of value system. For example, today in China, there are 150 million Christians. So they believe in God, right? There's probably 200 or 300 million Buddhists. And so what's the value system? Maybe there would be multi-cultural or multi-religion system. And there's some people argue we should go back to Chairman Mao's thoughts. And so today, what kind of thoughts will solidify all the people in China? That is the question. So what's the role, social role of entrepreneurs who made money, who already success, who want to contribute to the society? I think the number one is to promote rationality and to prevent society from polarizing. And as you know, in the last 5-10 years, China become much more polarized. People sort of starting to arguing each other, even cursing each other, hate each other. And we don't want this to happen. And another thing is, I think we need to explore rule-based interest attribution mechanism. What I mean by that? To give you an example, a few years ago, Chinese government issued a labor contract law, 劳动合同法. When this law was initially published, all the enterprise, including myself, was like caught in total surprise. And many companies are trying to figure out how to get around the law. That's the sort of a mentality of Chinese entrepreneur. And number one, they didn't know how to participate in the legislation process. They don't know how to put their input. And so such a law involved employers and employees, involved neither stakeholder. So only 3 professors plus some 处长 and 司长 put this important law together and published. So we need to change that process. And enterprises, entrepreneurs need to get into the process to make sure this law, when published, when made, was rational and reasonable so that everybody can accept. The situation with this kind of law is even local government, municipal government said, oh, in our city, we don't follow that law. So the law becomes become a joke, right? We don't want law to become a joke if you want to build rule of law society. Even the law is bad, you still have to comply. That's the spirit of law. And so going through social autonomy, we have to not only we have to practice, learn how to manage public organizations. And we have to support Chinese cultural renaissance, which will happen in the next 30 to 50 years. So if we look back 30 years, China create a lot of wealth. This was predominantly generated by the desire for material because we were so poor. We want to be rich. We want to get rid of poorness, right? And there's 4 important factors. One is the government. From initially suppressing to tolerance to recognition, today is entirely encouraging, right? If you look at the 60 resolutions of a third plenum communique, you couldn't expect more supportive government of a private enterprise by looking at the resolution. Entrepreneurs and the private enterprise is the pillar of the wealth generation. And the people say, what's the government contribution? In my view, is Chinese government or ruling party return from utopian thoughts back to common sense. They allow students to go back to school. They allow farm to raise stocks. They allow merchants to trade. That's what the ruling party has done, right? Return to common sense. And of course, over the last 35 years, there's a lot of management, human capital trained by school, by large company. Today, you can find a lot of management resources. And joining WTO World Financing System. So if we make parallel view for China to transition to a rule of law society in the next 30 years, I think the number one issue is the government has to go through this path one more time. And I read this third plenum resolution very carefully. I think I need to change this. In this one, I said China, this presentation was made about 6 months ago. I said the Chinese government is going through tolerance to recognition. I think Chinese government, after this third plenum, is well from here, recognition. I think because the key factors in China, it's impossible to register NGO because there's a system called collateral or 挂靠. You have to find a local government branch, say, I have to 挂靠 affiliate with 科技局 or 卫生局, those government branches. Those government branches, they do not want this because there's a risk associated. This resolution stopped that. You can just register without affiliation. And of course, we need to raise a lot of, nurture a lot of human capitals, and we need to work with the international organizations. So to conclude, China has been transformed to a modern country through wealth creation by entrepreneurs driven by their desire of a material. China will transit to modern governance in the next 30 years by building rule of law, driven fundamentally by desire of basic rights. To avoid turmoil, shorten the chaos, if there is one, and realize peaceful transition is our inescapable historical responsibility. Thank you.
We have time for 3 questions if people want to come up to the microphones.
Hi, Mr. Wang, very nice talk. And my question is, so what do you think the driving force for the American entrepreneurs to let them have the very powerful network, social network, and social responsibility, and compare with China, what's the biggest difference?
You mean driving force in America?
Or value system like that?
American entrepreneurs?
Yes.
Doing the social impact?
Yes.
Okay. U.S. has a long history of self-governance. I think that's just a part of their tradition. They're part of an extension. I think basically that is in their blood. Yeah, thank you.
I'm a student from Northeastern University, and thank you for your speech, and I learned a lot about how to make a stable society in our country. My first question is about us 100 years ago. Our society is different from now. It's agriculture country, and we need a lot of peasants to do the to farm, so that we can have only a few people to rule them, and the rest of the people just need to work and give us the forest harvest, and that's why only a few people can rule that amount, huge amounts of people. But for now, each person, everyone is talent, and maybe that's made the government hard to rule out of us. That's one possible ways to make the people, the rule government to increase their.
So your question basically, because modern society is more complex to manage, so you need more officials. Yeah, you are absolutely right. It is much harder to manage modern society than agricultural society. However, if you compare to China's government overhead with the modern countries like Japan, Germany, or US, still much, much higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I still have another question. That's there are a lot proper noun, but maybe this question I cannot, as my limited English ability, I cannot explain in English. Sorry, I'll ask for Chinese.
Okay.
先生，关于您之前的一个数据是，就我们现在的政府人员有7000万人。对，我想就是请问您一下，就是这个数据，您是
这个数据也是我援引一个研究报告，这不是政府人员，不是公务员，这是财政供养人数，就是由这个 taxpayer 养的人数，有的他可能不是公务员，比如事业单位都包括在里面，就是 overall management overhead。
但之前您的话，就是因为清朝、唐宋元明清，他们之前的话，可能就是在您统计里面，您统计人数的时候，统计进入这些秀才之类的，也是 government 就是政府供养人员了吗？
因为是这样，就是实际上在过去这个 society， 它的成本绝对不是就是只养 official， 但是它的区别在于let me try to answer so that English speaker people can listen. That the difference is there's still a lot of resources put into managing the society besides what the government portion. But these were kind of donated by the private sector and managed by the gentries and landlords. So if you put them together, they may be still a large amount. Just like in this country, right? I think in the US, the private donation is about $600 billion every year, okay? And, but that's very different because that's based on sort of their own will, right? And generally, in worldwide, if those resources were managed by private sectors, it's much more efficient than managed by the government, let alone put aside the corruption issue. Let's assume there's no corruption in the government side. It's still much, much more efficient.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mr. Wang, for the excellent speech. And my name is Xuan, and I'm a young professional practicing in architecture and urban planning. Mm-hmm. So I think a great opportunity for China is, which is different from US, is currently experiencing really fast urbanization and globalization at the same time. So also many scholars in urban studies, they believe the social and cultural power of the nations is gradually taken by the global cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, or Boston, New York City. So my question is, do you think there's a transition considering the entrepreneurship from the scale of international, such as US to China, and a transition to a scale of between global cities such as Beijing and Boston, New York to Shanghai? Thank you.
So I'm not sure I fully understand your question. I guess your question is whether the power will transition from a country or nation state to a global city?
Yes.
I haven't thought about that, but clearly there's a trend that today conglomerates, companies like Microsoft, Google, possesses a lot of power, and sometimes probably larger than a nation state. And with the internet, with the travel, with the ease of the travel, I think the border will physical border become less meaningful. That's definitely the trend.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Wang.